Hi, my name's Tim Slattery and I'm the CEO of APN Property Group. Thanks very much for watching this short video that we've put together to explain what property for income means. I'm joined today by Howard Brenchley, who's the founder of APN Funds Management, to explain what this phrase means when it comes to investing in commercial property. Howard, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Tim. It's good to be here.
Look, I thought I'd just start. For APN, property for income is very much central to the way we have always invested in real estate, and I thought you might start by just explaining what that phrase actually means in practice.
Well, I think investment is all about managing risk and return, and it's important when you look at your portfolio to determine which of your investments are there for income and which are there for growth. And that's sometimes very hard to do. And I've found one of the easiest ways to look at it, particularly from an asset point of view, is to look at the cash flow of a hypothetical company. So we might have a company doing whatever it does, a service company or a producer of widgets, and that makes its revenue from sales of its goods or services. And from that positive cash flow comes the various deductions that you as a business must make. And that can include salaries, it can include various inputs to your business, it could include the rent on your premises, it could include payments on bonds or borrowings from lenders, and the cost of your utilities like gas and electricity and so on. And it's after those deductions that you get from a cash flow point of view, your net profit or your net surplus or loss in some cases, and then from that you have what's available to give to your shareholders at the end of the year as a dividend or a distribution. Now within that simple cash flow you can see four of the main asset classes available to investors. The first one, the rent to the premises, you pay to the landlord who owns the property. The second, the interest on borrowings, is paid to your banker or your debt arranger. Cost of utilities goes to the owner of the infrastructure, so gas, electricity, telephone, those sorts of things are your infrastructure type investment. And it's only after those have been paid that your shareholders get any payment. They are in effect at the end of the queue. So those who have first access to that company's cash flow, the bankers, the landlords, the utilities, have a priority position in access to the cash flow. That gives them less risk because it's the shareholders at the end of the line who carry the most risk. Now with that risk comes the potential for extra return because you are getting a leveraged return. So a small increase in sales or a small decrease in expenses has a greater impact on the return to shareholders. So that's a good way to look at the risk and return and how we look at property as an income investment, because you're standing in a priority position as the landlord.
I mean, most investors, I think, would appreciate that all different investments have different risk and return profiles, but really what you're saying is that with the property for income, in some ways, an income-based investment from commercial property has some similarities with a fixed interest investment.
Yeah, I think it's very important. In effect, a landlord could be regarded as a banker in the property sector. So a banker lends cash, lends money. A landlord lends property, and where the banker may get interest on that loan, the landlord gets rent on that loan. And that loan is controlled by, in the terms of the bankers, a loan agreement, in the terms of the landlord, a lease agreement. Now, sounds very similar. The major difference occurs when we see the end of that loan agreement or lease term. At the end of the loan agreement, the banker gets the cash back.
Yeah.
They lend $100,000, they get $100,000 back. The landlord doesn't get cash back, they get the property back, what we call in the property industry reversion. The property reverts back to the landlord. Now, that property may be more valuable or less valuable when it comes back to the landlord. Depends on the market conditions, the condition of the property, that old thing, property with location, and the general market demand and supply for rental property. So that's the major risk. The major difference between a landlord and a banker is the banker gets back exactly what they lent. The landlord gets back the property, but it may not be exactly what they originally lent.
Yeah.
And there's the risk.
Yeah. Those rental payments under the lease, which I guess one could compare to the payments, the coupon payments or the interest payments on a fixed interest instrument have some similarities. You mentioned the lease, and I know how much time we spend looking at leases and thinking about leases, but perhaps you could just explain, when we're investing in commercial real estate, how important that lease is and what are the things that we look at.
Yeah, I've always said, people used to say the big three words in property are location, location, location. Now, in commercial property, that's relevant when you've had the property reverted back to you. But my three big L's for property are leases, leases, leases.
Yes.
Leases are important. Leases give property its differentiation when you're looking at your asset allocation. The lease protects the landlord from the ups and downs of the business cycle. So your tenant, the person who's borrowed your property, their business will have profits that go up and down depending on economic conditions, depending on their particular industry cycles. And that's reflected in what happens in the share market. So the share market will go up and down, reflecting equity conditions. The landlord with a lease that might go for 5, 10, 15, 20 years is protected from the variability of the business of their tenant by the lease. The tenant has an obligation to pay you rent, which is generally a fixed amount or adjusted to market every year or two, or on a fixed basis. But almost all leases in Australia have a condition that rent cannot fall. So you as the landlord are protected from the business conditions of your tenant through the life of that lease. And that's a very important thing to look at, because it really is what differentiates commercial property from other asset classes.
Yeah, right, I see. So, I mean, we've talked about income, and then we've talked about, I guess, as a function of the lease and those rental income payments. So, when we're thinking about property for income, how do we apply that to our portfolios overall?
Well, I think there's a number of ways where we specifically use that in our investment, any of our products that have that property for income label. The first thing is that those products recognise that leases and the rents that are generated under those leases are fundamental to our investment philosophy. The second thing we look at is that we try to avoid any investments in property that might have equity type returns.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of those non-rental returns that might be property development, funds management, various other things like that. So we try to focus on rental income because that's what commercial property is all about. The third thing we look at, we try to reduce that reversionary risk that I talked about when the property comes back to the landlord as lender. So to try and get those leases as long as possible reduces the impact of that reversion. So we try to look at longer than average leases. And lastly, we look at the ultimate utility of the property. So we look at properties that are going to have a long-term use in the property market. And again, that will reduce the impact of the property reversion on your portfolio.
Yeah, right. Well, so not all properties are created equal, and clearly that rental income is a core part of the way our investment philosophy has evolved over time. Look, it's always a pleasure talking to you. So thanks very much for your time in taking us through what property for income really means in practice. From the founder of APN Funds Management, it's a pleasure. So thank you very much for your time. It's great to have been able to talk to you today about that. And for any of our investors out there that would like to learn more or to contact us, please feel free to access the details via our website, and we'd love to talk to you. Thanks again, Howard.
Thanks, Tim.